This is AviAbelow here in the Israeli parliament called the Knesset. I am standing next to one of the most important people that I believe in the area of international human rights. This is Irwin Cotler. Can you introduce yourself? I know you were a parliamentarian in Canada, Minister of Justice in Canada.
I just retired from being a member of Parliament after 16 years, during which time, as you mentioned, I was also a Minister of Justice, and now I've just started to launch a Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights, which will be an international consortium, parliamentarians, scholars, jurists, human rights defenders, NGOs, united in the pursuit of justice, inspired by, anchored in Wallenberg's humanitarian legacy.
So for those
in a word.
Unbelievable. For those unfamiliar with Raoul Wallenberg was which country? He was.
Well, Raoul Wallenberg is a Swedish non-Jew who, in 6 months in 1944, saved more Hungarian Jews than any single government. He saved the remnant of 100,000 Hungarian Jews after close to 500,000 had already been deported to death camps and the like. So Wallenberg is really an illustration of how one person with the compassion to care and the courage to act can transform history and make a difference.
He is a role model. He should be a role model for anyone who cares about human rights, regardless of race, religion, etc. So today I have the pleasure and honor of meeting Mr. Cotler here in the Parliament of Israel, in the Knesset, talking about the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, which is about a hatred of Israel. Can you tell us more of what you talked about inside to Israeli parliamentarians? What is the danger in this BDS movement?
Well, the thing that the BDS is part of a larger delegitimization movement, which basically launders their delegitimization of Israel under the under the rubrics of universal public values. What it intends to do, in a word, is to portray Israel as the enemy of all that is good and the repository of all that is evil, to turn it into a moral and political leper, so that this will bring about its own demise. And you see it, this laundering takes place under the protective cover of the United Nations, where in annual rituals at the United Nations there's some 20 resolutions of condemnation against Israel, 4 against the rest of the world combined.
Crazy.
So what you have is not only an obsessive preoccupation with the singling out of one member state for differential and discriminatory indictment, but you're giving the real human rights violators exculpatory immunity. And BDS, with its obsessive preoccupation with Israel, is doing the same thing, giving the real human rights violators exculpatory immunity. The second thing is laundering delegitimization under the authority of international law. So you have an absurd situation that the state parties to the 4th Geneva Convention, which is the convention that deals with international humanitarian law, they came together last year to put one state in the entire international community in the docket. That state happened to be Israel. It was the 3rd time in history that one state was put in the docket. All 3 times it happened to be Israel. So what it means is that countries like Iran or Russia or China, and I can go through all the major human rights rights, they are not only given a free pass, but they're not even asked to come before the Geneva Conventions at all. Israel is singled out, and has been the only one singled out 3 times in the last 40 years. Same thing with the United Nations Council on Human Rights. Same thing with the struggle against racism. The worst thing we can do today in the struggle against racism, or the worst thing one can do, is to label a state as an apartheid state. Because apartheid under international law is a crime against humanity. If you're saying Israel is an apartheid state, you're saying it's a crime against humanity. It's a crime against humanity, it has no right to be. And worse, you also say it's a Nazi state. So not only does it have no right to be, but we have an obligation, in fact, to ensure that it has no right to be. That's BDS in a nutshell. Defaming Israel as an apartheid state, as a Nazi state, and the real painful part of this whole thing is that it shames and demeans the real struggle against the real apartheid. Because if you say that Israel is like South African apartheid, that means South African apartheid had a universal franchise, had a free press, had an independent judiciary, had NGOs running around holding it to account. And of course, None of that is the case. So on the one hand, you not only defame Israel with the false, scurrilous indictment of being an apartheid state, but you demean and you shame the real struggle against the real apartheid. And that's what I have against the BDS movement, is that they are undermining the universal public values that we should all, in fact, care about, but under the laundering of delegitimization, under these universal public values, under the UN, under the authority of international law, under the culture of human, under the struggle against racism, they are in effect eroding and undermining all these universal public values.
Right.
For that, they have to be held to account, not simply for what they're doing to Israel, but the fact that they're undermining really what humanity is all about.
Right. For anyone joining or has joined, this is Mr. Irwin Cotler, a very well-known international human rights attorney, Minister of Justice from Canada. Don't listen to me. This is someone very knowledgeable of international law, of the United Nations, telling you all about the truth behind the hatred towards Israel. I know you recently wrote about anti-Semitism and the growth of anti-Semitism. I know what it feels like in Israel and how it affects Israel. How is that anti-Semitism affecting all of humanity and the world with its growth?
Well, as we've learned only too well, that while it begins with Jews, it doesn't end with Jews. We are now on the 70th anniversary, a little bit past now, of the liberation of Auschwitz, the most brutal extermination camp of the 20th century.
Right.
1.3 million people died at Auschwitz. 1.1 million of them were Jews. Let there be no mistake about it. Jews were murdered at Auschwitz because of anti-Semitism. But anti-Semitism did not die at Auschwitz. And anti-Semitism continues to be the bloodied canary in the global mineshaft of evil today. And because, as we know, as I said, it begins with Jews but doesn't end with Jews, we have a common responsibility to fight against this anti-Semitism in all its guises.
Now, I know your wife and daughter are waiting patiently to eat lunch with you. One last question. Something that bothers me, and you mentioned it, is the United Nations, the hypocrisy of the United Nations, not ignoring the true genocides and ethnic cleansings taking on around the true atrocities and putting all of its focus on Israel. Is there any hope for change at the United Nations? Or how can Israel survive in an international setting where the United Nations is hypocritically against us, no matter what happens?
Those who care about the United Nations and those who care about what the United Nations stand for and in fact was created for, which is really the promotion and protection of human dignity, which is really the equality of all states, large and small, have to undertake the responsibility at this point of combating the singling out of a member state like Israel for differential and discriminatory treatment, for this assault on the human dignity of the people of Israel and the Jewish people international, and have to say, look, if we care about the UN, we have to ensure that no state can be singled out for discriminatory treatment. And we will make it our mantra and our responsibility to return the United Nations to its original ideals, to return it to its original objectives, so that there can be equality for all states, large and small, and that must include Israel, and that there will be the promotion and protection of human dignity for all its inhabitants, and that includes the Jewish people. And therefore, what we need to do at this point is to return the United Nations to that which it aspired to be and must be, and not let it be used and abused to undermine its own founding ideals. Right.
Mr. Cotler, thank you so very much. Continue being the light of truth for all of us to be inspired by. There's so much a world of lies, and the truth that you have and your knowledge is so important. So I just want to thank you on behalf of everybody and all of humanity for everything that you do. And with that, folks, I'm going to take a picture with this very important person, and I'm going to send him off to lunch because his wife and daughter are waiting very patiently.